it's kind of like the dog that's chasing the car, and then you catch it and smack your head off it, and you realize, what the heck was I running so fast for? So I think that was a big theme, and that's something we did emphasize. It's really the basis of our first chapter. I think a lot of financial books, it's all about getting to retirement, and we really try to reframe that and focus on using your growing financial independence to make your life better on the journey, and just viewing it from a totally different construct. And then as we taught people how to, save more and invest better, at the end, we came back to that. And how do you enjoy the journey, and what are some mistakes people made, and how do you avoid them? And then what is your purpose once you get beyond financial independence, where you're not reliant on going to work for a paycheck? So why do you want to go to work, and what is your bigger purpose? And
it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Chris Mamula, who retired early to live the life of his dreams. He shares the path that you can take to do the same. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. Today's quote: "You have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own, and you know what you know, and you are the one who will decide where to go." Dr. Seuss. Oh, the places you'll go. That quote pretty much sums up our episode today. Where have you decided you want to go? It amazes me how few people actually do that and take the time to figure it out and how to get there. Life is pretty simple, but we tend to make it complicated. Once you have your dreams written out, it becomes so much easier to achieve them because you are focused. You can then say no to what doesn't allow you to move forward in the direction you choose to go. One of the first things I have clients work on is their life plan, so we know where we're going, and then we can plan out the steps to achieve that and take them. And then we remove the friction as it occurs, because there will always be problems that pop up. But having someone there to help you during that is what brings about massive success. Last week's action step was to describe a pen without using the word pen. The idea is to get out of the box, which is what financial independence is all about. How did it go for you? Did you try it? So, our guest today is Chris Mamula, who used the principles of traditional retirement planning combined with creative lifestyle design to retire from a career as a physical therapist at the age of 41. After poor experiences with the financial industry early in his professional life, he educated himself on investing and tax planning. Now he draws on his experience to write about wealth building, do-it-yourself investing, financial planning, early retirement, and lifestyle design at Can I Retire Yet? Chris's writing has been featured in MarketWatch, Dough Roller, Business Insider, and Rockstar Finance. He's also the primary author of the book, Choose Financial Independence, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence. Let's meet our guest. Welcome to Rich Your Soul, Chris Mamula. It's great to have you join us today.
I'm excited to be here and talk to you.
And I'm excited for you to have the conversation as well. So we always start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
I can't ever say I remember learning anything about money from school. For my family, I think it was definitely like more learning just by watching, by example. My dad, right out of high school, he went to work for a newspaper as a photographer, and he was really self-taught, and he did quite well. He ended up managing the photographers at his newspaper. He won several awards, but he just kind of realized that wasn't what he wanted to do, and he quit his job and started his own photography business probably when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And then I just kind of watched and learned what that version of entrepreneurship looked like, which to me looked like a heck of a lot of work and not a lot of security compared to when he had a job. But I know he was a lot happier. So kind of different lessons in there. And then from my mom, she also just high school educated and started working as a bank teller. And then she ended up kind of managing the finances for my dad's business. And she was just always, what I learned from her was just frugality. She was really good at stretching a dollar because we never really had a big household income. But we never certainly felt poor. And I think probably to other families, we kind of looked rich just because my mom was so good at stretching a dollar and making it go far. So those are really my take-home lessons I learned. And then probably if there's one other just from both of them combined is they were both very anti-debt. And like I said, I don't remember many conversations, but I definitely remember like when I was, I don't know exactly how old I was, probably junior high-ish. I know they paid off their mortgage, and that was definitely something we talked about and celebrated in the house. And just in general, they were very anti-debt. I don't know that they ever had car loans or anything like that. And so that was kind of ingrained for me from a young age to live within your means. So those are the big ones.
And staying out of debt is important. And there is nothing at all with frugality. I think that's a lost art in America these days, right? You don't hear it talked about mainstream as much. When I was growing up, frugality was just what people did. It was just kind of the way of life. But now it seems we're a much more consumer-oriented society, unfortunately.
Yeah, and my wife did have some school debt, and so we really wanted to get out of debt quickly. Like that was just something that she and I both agreed upon very early. And so how we did that was we just started living off of her salary and using mine to pay off her debt. And then because that was working, we just kind of stuck with that. And so we really kind of always, we had very different careers, but kind of parallel career paths. And so kind of more or less, we just saved 50% of our income from day one by living off her salary and saving mine. But because we made more money than my parents, to me, that didn't feel frugal. And if I would tell people I was frugal, I would kind of feel like a fraud because we lived so much better than both my wife and I grew up. But yeah, I mean, frugality, I guess there was that frugality bent in there, but I never really considered it frugal because our lives looked a lot different than the lives we grew up living.
It's funny because I am frugal, but it doesn't mean I don't spend money. And I think that's where there's always that conversation. What's the difference between cheap and frugal? And I don't think that frugal means that it's not that you don't spend money. It's just that when you spend money, you spend it wisely. So you can still spend a lot, which it sounds like you're doing, but you're doing it wisely. And in your case, with a 50% savings rate, that's just phenomenal. I mean, you're living so far below your means.
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure how we figured out that we should do that or stayed on that path. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff, so I guess I would consider myself part of the FIRE, like Financial Independence Retire Early community. And that's kind of the things they preach is housing, cars, and food are your biggest expenses. So if you want to save a lot, you have to do well in those areas. And we did that. We always bought just less house than we could afford, but we never felt like it was, it was always a nice house and just modest. And we always had 2 cars, but they were always used cars and purchased with cash. And so we just did a lot better than most people in those areas. And then we were able to spend on things that we truly did value. Travel, probably the biggest one, and different experiences. Again, related to travel, we got into outdoor things, skiing, going to concerts, sporting events, those kind of things we just really valued and we wanted to do. So we spent, I would think, honestly, fairly lavishly on those things.
I was going to say, those aren't frugal sports.
No. And so we started off backpacking, which is pretty frugal, but then we're not, we have a hard time being content, both my wife and I think. And so it kind of grew from backpacking, and then we got into like longer trips. And then we started getting into mountaineering and technical climbing. And then we got into high altitude mountaineering. So we were going to like Ecuador and the volcanoes in Mexico and into Alaska and places like that. So no, it definitely wasn't cheap hobbies.
So are you doing anything to teach your daughter about money?
So I think kind of trying to follow that model that I think worked for me. Like I said, my parents might have tried to teach me about money, but I certainly don't remember. And I really kind of believe that whole idea of more as caught than taught. And so not really overtly, but I still think we live a relatively, again, compared to, I guess, what we could, quote unquote, afford to live, we live a relatively frugal lifestyle. We live in a pretty modest neighborhood. We actually just, because I left my job and my wife works part-time from home, we really didn't need two cars. So we just went down to one car, even though, I mean, it wasn't really a financial burden. It was just kind of more in the way. And so I think she sees the way we live and probably understands that. But by the same token, I mean, she's been skiing since she was 2 years old. So we kind of gotten her into our same habits and hobbies. And we've traveled with her a good bit. So yeah, I mean, I think she just kind of is going to sense that and pick it up, but not a whole lot of overt teaching.
And it's true because kids don't listen to what you say. They listen to what you do. So as long as you're modeling correctly, I think they will start to get it and to learn it. So you said something interesting. Your dad left his job, started his own company, and even though it was a struggle, he was happier.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to kind of hear more about that and how you kind of saw that come to be.
I mean, I was fairly young, so this is really based on my recollection, but like some kind of things that really stood out to me is when he was young, like I know we traveled, again, like they didn't make big incomes, but they made enough, like we were flying. So we had relatives in California. So we went to Disneyland. We had family friends that lived in Orlando. So we were at Disney World, and we did a lot of like pretty nice trips when I was a little kid. And because he had all this vacation time and we had enough money. And then when he quit, we definitely, starting a business, it was harder financially getting going. And then even as he got established, he was just always kind of a one-man show. And he did end up eventually hiring one or two employees, but he was still involved in everything. So it was really hard to get away. So I saw us like not traveling, the type of things that I really enjoyed when I was really younger. And so I saw like a lot of trade-offs that to me, I felt like I liked life better when he wasn't an entrepreneur, when he had a job. But I think he was a lot happier. And so, yeah, I mean, I kind of have a mixed bag view of entrepreneurship. And I think that I always looked at like having a career, a job, working for somebody else as being a little bit safer. And my opinions have kind of evolved over time. I think that he was learning as an entrepreneur and doing the best he could with the knowledge he had. But now I see entrepreneurship as a little bit differently.
So how do you see it now then?
What I did is we kind of worked to a point where we were essentially financially independent. And I started off thinking that I wanted to retire because I didn't really know another way out of a career that like I was kind of just burning out on. And so we saved up and our idea was I think we were going to just retire and both leave our careers. And then as we started to see that comes with trade-offs, just like having a job comes with trade-offs. So we were living with all this abundance. We were saving approximately 50% of our money. And then to go to retirement, even if you kind of oversave, you really don't know when you have enough. And essentially you're playing a game of chicken with your money. Like, are you going to run out of money or are you going to run out of life? And when you're only in your early 40s and you have this potentially 40, 50, even possibly 60-year time frame, it's really hard to model that with any kind of mathematical validity. And it just got really scary. And so we kind of started looking for different options. And we kind of realized that I could approach entrepreneurship very differently than my dad because, I mean, I have a runway of years before I really even need to make money, which in some way, I guess, is a little bit of a curse as much as a blessing, because if I had to make money, I mean, I would probably be more hustling to make money. But by putting myself in this position, I can kind of pick and choose and design more of a lifestyle business. And like I just finished writing a book. I spent 2 years on it and haven't made a penny yet. And there's no guarantee I ever will. But because of that, I was able to really kind of pour a lot of time and effort into it and create something that I turned out being proud of. And whether it makes money or not is almost kind of irrelevant. And that's kind of a neat way to approach business. And then by being able to do it from my home and on the schedule I want. I'm basically free to have all this time with my daughter and seek outdoor adventures. I think I skied 50 some days last year, and basically live the life I want to live and kind of work around my business versus trying to squeeze in life around a job, which is what I was doing. So it's a very different approach to entrepreneurship.
And I think it's a growing one. I mean, that's the way I prefer to be too, is that my business and my income kind of mold around to me versus the other way around. I mean, if you're spending all your time chasing money, you're missing a major part of life. And it's a shame when people have to work till they're 65, and by the time they're ready to enjoy the money, that they're old and they don't have the ability to enjoy it as much. And you've got a very short time frame then for when you still have the ability to have the health to go around and do everything. So enjoying the journey, I think, is a big part of that process.
So we were kind of gradually building up and trying to accumulate a lot of vacation time by trading that in instead of getting more raises. So we kind of had a lot of flexibility in our lifestyle. And so we still wished we had more time, but I guess we didn't like our job, but we didn't hate it bad enough to really learn what we wanted to do to get away from it. And then once we had our daughter, like we had these hobbies, getting outdoors that we loved. We had this little girl who we didn't think we could have kids. We were married for about 12 years when this happened. And we just both kind of adored her and wanted to be around her. And then we had these jobs that were dominating our time, and kind of something was going to have to give. And so we really kind of determined that we didn't need to make as much money. And that's when we really got serious about, well, how do we do something really radically different than what most people do so we can have time for these things that were truly important versus having our whole lives revolve around our jobs and our careers.
And you were able to do that because you were already living on half and you had been saving all this time. So you had the freedom to be able to make that choice. I noticed in listening to some of the stuff you've done on other sites that you talked about how you were looking at other people and noticing that many of these so-called successful people were not happy, and that you would travel around and you would see people who essentially had very little to no money being really happy. I'd love for you to share that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I kind of talked a little about how I really didn't grow up in the outdoors, but one of my first trips right after we got married, so probably about 2001, 2002, we went backpacking to the Grand Canyon, and I just fell in love with being outdoors, being in open spaces. It was more than just, being out hiking. It was really almost like a spiritual experience to be away and just to be unplugged from everything. And I found that these were really like my happiest moments. And as we started to get into there's a climbing community, and there's kind of an affectionate term they use of being a dirtbag, where essentially you almost have to be poor and your whole life is about seeking these adventures and being in the outdoors. And there was something appealing about that, but I also grew up without much money, and I also liked the idea of having some money. And so we would kind of go back and forth. And then in my professional life, I was in the medical field, and I had friends that were doctors who were making $300,000-$400,000 a year, and yet they really just didn't seem as happy as these other people. But they did have some financial security. And so what we kind of did is tried to say, how can we take the best of both worlds? So how can we live passionately and spend on things that are truly important to us, but by the same token, have this professional lifestyle and earn some money and just sock that money away so that we could one day escape and we're not trapped in these careers for 30 or 40 years and being burnt out like many of the professionals that we knew that were ahead of us in age, but actually behind us financially and behind us in the ability to choose the life they wanted to live.
And today in the medical field, it's just getting worse and worse. And everything is becoming corporatized. Medicine is turning into that same corporate atmosphere you see working for large companies. And it's no longer fun. It's hard enough to deal with people who are sick, and then to have to deal with politics and everything else. It's just, I don't know how people do it anymore.
It's a really sad situation. I think people, it's kind of hard for people to feel sympathy for physicians because they maybe are making $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. And so people have a hard time relating to that. But I think what people don't see is these people go to school for 10 or 12 years and they're delaying gratification forever. And a lot of times working for free, or then maybe working for $40,000 a year, working, 10, 12, 15-hour days as interns and residents. And then when they finally get out, they elevate their lifestyle and they realize this career that they were going for isn't necessarily what it was cracked up to be, but now they've elevated their lifestyle. And it's really sad. But if you look at the statistics, physician suicide is I think 3 or 4 times the general population. And there are a fair number of physicians, like I talked about the FIRE movement, and there's a fair number of physicians that if they are willing to make some changes, they can earn their way out of it. But like me as a physical therapist, we have a lot of these challenges where you go to school for 7 years and people are coming out of school $150,000 or $200,000 in debt, and you're only making $60,000 and maybe topping out at about 90 or 100,000, and you can't earn your way out of it. And it's just, it's a sad situation where people are trapped, and it's not good for the provider. It's not good for a patient going in, and you're just dealing with burnt out professionals, and it's just a bad situation. And so that's another big piece of my motivation to want to share this message and show people there's a route and there's hope.
There is. And I think for physicians, and I've dealt with a lot of them, is when they come out of their fellowship and residency, if they would just spend a couple more years living like they were still residents and building a strong foundation, everything else will work out. It's just that they tend, because it's taken so long, they tend to kind of go a little crazy in the beginning. And that one choice, I think, changes everything for their future outcomes. And it's unfortunate. And unfortunately, they don't talk about money in medical school, which is the other problem. But it's like all school, right? Nobody talks about money.
Yeah, I mean, in society in general, you spend all this time to develop your career so you can go out and make money, but nobody teaches you what to do with the money once you have it. And so I think people just kind of fall into that pattern of whatever you make, you spend it. If you make X dollars, then you buy X house. But if you make 2X, then you buy twice the house and twice the car. And that's just what you do. And there's not a lot of thought and intentionality, unfortunately. And once you're into that lifestyle, even if you don't really love it, I think it's kind of hard to take that step backwards, whether it's pride, whether it's just you're used to having something, but it's really hard to wind that back. And that's definitely one area where my wife and I were fortunate in getting on this right track so early in our lives and our careers that we never really had to feel that sacrifice because we were getting those kind of big things right. And so we never had to dial it back too much.
And that's the thing. If you can start off right, everything else works out. So you had mentioned that you didn't learn about money growing up or in school. So how did you figure out how to invest all of this savings that you had?
The positive thing we did, we got this big things right, and we had this savings rate. So we were accumulating a lot of money. The downside is we never really learned what to do with it. I definitely bought into the idea. I didn't start off with this idea that we could retire at 40. I kind of thought that early retirement for people like us with normal careers and normal backgrounds was 55 or 60, maybe if we were lucky. And I thought investing was just something that normal people didn't do. And you hired it out. You just got an advisor. And so honestly, I didn't take any time to really put much thought into that. And I didn't seek out, I just basically, I went to my parents and I asked who they invested with. And, because I felt that they were doing pretty well. And in retrospect, I think they were doing well in spite of, not because of the advice they were receiving, but I didn't know that because I didn't know what questions to ask or what to look for. And so we just went in with blindly trusting this advisor and did whatever he recommended. And it led to a lot of costly mistakes.
So what were some of the mistakes that you had to deal with?
I think the biggest one, just if I can put this in kind of more general terms, is anytime you're dealing with a financial advisor or really even a real estate agent or an insurance salesman or anything, they're getting paid. And you have to understand the conflicts that creates because, you want to get the best financial products or financial services. And part of that is paying the least for it. And their incentive is to make money for themselves. And so their incentive is to charge as much as they can. So there's always this inherent conflict. And we just didn't understand that. We didn't understand there were different models to seek financial advice. We didn't understand any of that. So again, we just kind of didn't ask questions. So we ended up paying far too much. We were buying, I don't know how technical you want to get on the investing stuff, but we were buying loaded mutual funds, meaning we were paying about 5.5% upfront to the advisor. And then what we didn't know is it was also paying him on the backside. So we were paying about 1% there. And then we were investing in taxable accounts instead of tax advantaged accounts. So we were paying unnecessary taxation year after year after year. And then those investments were not only were they in taxable accounts, but they were in tax inefficient vehicles inside of those accounts. So that was creating more taxable income. And then ultimately, we did have some money in retirement accounts, and even that, the advisor had us roll over into a product called a variable annuity. And hopefully, most of your listeners won't know what that is, and that's because they wouldn't have interacted with it. But for the average investor, there's really never a great reason, other than very isolated cases, and definitely it wasn't our case. But that cost us even about double what our other investments. We had a substantial portion of our investments in that. So yeah, I mean, it was basically everything that I now teach people not to do is what we did. So there was a lot of bad things that we did.
And that happens. And unfortunately, without being educated, and schools don't educate, you have an MBA, they don't teach you about this kind of stuff in that program. If you're not interested and you don't learn it, then you get stuck with high fees. And they have done studies, and the number one factor to outcomes over 30, 40 years is high fees. And that is the number one thing that prevents you from the success. And I don't think people realize how much 1, 2, 3, and in your case, almost over 5% year after year makes a dramatic difference in how much money you end up with at the end of the journey. So how did you figure out how to do it correctly?
The reason that we decided to finally educate ourselves. So we were just going to kind of wing it. Like, we didn't have a financial plan. We didn't have any sophistication. And we were just going to kind of wing it and kind of live this ski bum dirtbag lifestyle. We were going to move west, and I was going to start cutting back. And we were married in 2001. And this was like in 2012, we were actually preparing to get ready to put our house on the market. My wife had been offered a job in Utah. We were going to move west at that time, and we found out she was pregnant, and we didn't think we could have kids. And so it was quite a shock, and it made us kind of step back and reassess everything. And like now, instead of just us winging it, we had another human that we were responsible for, and we felt that we needed to educate ourselves. So I just started devouring everything I could. And that's when I kind of fell into the fire blogs. And I started learning through them, and that inspired me to that I could do this myself. Probably the most influential, the first one I found was a gentleman named J.L. Collins, and his blog is just called jlcollinsnh.com. And he wrote what's called a stock series, and he's eventually turned it into a book. But that was hands down the first thing that I read that I could actually grasp. And it led me down a path to start asking a lot better questions and finding better answers by doing so.
That is really what it comes down to, asking better questions to get better answers. And there's the basic information, but when you start digging in deeper, that's truly when you get the real knowledge that kind of helps you to take that next step and get ahead. And most of this stuff is not difficult. This is not rocket science. There are very simple ways that you can do things to allow your money to grow without a lot of effort. And you just have to figure it out for your particular life and what works for you. There's a lot of different paths to wealth. And you just have to figure out where your skills are and how they intersect with your ability to grow your money.
I think there's multiple valid ways that you can invest your money. But if you're going to choose to invest in what most people think of as investment stocks and bonds, I think the best chance, and it's not that I think, research shows that the best chance that you have is, like you talked about before, having the lowest cost funds. And then it's very counterintuitive because in most areas of life, the more you do, the better your results will be. But it's actually the less you do with your investments, a lot of times is going to put you in a position to have more chance to succeed. So it's counterintuitive, and you really have to, really do your research and read multiple things and cross-check things. And eventually it started to click for me, but it was finding that one source that really simplified it to get me started. That was really key for me.
And for everybody, it's a different source. So you've got to keep going until you figure out what works for you, and then constantly ask questions and better questions, and then take action and start investing. And then, as you said, staying the course. Constantly changing your plan or chasing returns will get you in trouble. I know it did me. I was constantly chasing returns. So I was always behind the growth instead of in front of the growth. And I'm still trying to figure it out. It's not difficult, but you have to be able to figure out what the future is going to bring, because things are constantly changing. And what worked in the past financially is not necessarily what's going to be the best answer going forward.
I would agree. I think it's generally pretty simple, but it's not easy because there's always new information and conflicting reports and different ideas. And to be able to sort through and to kind of have a set of principles that you can go back to and kind of have a foundation that you can go back to, I think is really key.
It is. And I know that most of the FI crowd is very much into Vanguard and they're very much into index funds. But yet I think in today's market and in today's world that may no longer be the best solution. It was a great solution that got us to today. But from today going forward, I'm not exactly sure what the best solution is going to be. And it may not be that. So I think people should always be improving their knowledge and not be indoctrinated to this is the one and only path to success.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you definitely have to always be learning and growing in all facets of life.
So one of the things that you mentioned is you took this path and it was all about early retirement. And now you've kind of changed your mindset a little bit, right? Almost to anti-retirement. What's that all about?
Yeah, so I guess we started with this idea, this belief that retirement is something you do when you're 60 or 65, and it's really not possible to retire when you're 30 or 40. It's just, you can't do it. And then we started finding these fire blogs, and it was the extreme end of the spectrum where it's really easy. You just track your expenses and you figure out what you're spending, and then you accumulate 25 times that. And kind of, we talked about if you invest in index funds, you can withdraw 4% of that. It's called the 4% rule, and it'll sustain you indefinitely. And it sounds so easy. And, but then as you really start to get into it, first off, I don't buy into that at all. With today's environment, kind of like you talked about, it's definitely becoming more challenging. These are very challenging times to be an investor, just the cycle that we're in. So I don't know that that's valid at all. But then also, even beyond that, and probably a much bigger picture thing, you get to be financially independent because you're a very good saver. And I don't think you can save 50% of your income like we did for 15 or 16 years. If you're struggling and fighting it every day, you have to kind of embrace it and enjoy saving. And it's got to be something that's part of who you are. And so to go from somebody that's having this abundance and this excess to now spending down your portfolio, and kind of like we talked about before, you're almost playing a game of chicken, whether you're going to run out of money or you're going to run out of life. It's very unappealing. And it's really the exact opposite skill set of what gets you to this point. And so as we kind of really started questioning that, we went from retirement's impossible to retirement is easy to, well, you can maybe do it, but is it even what we really want to do? Is it appealing at all? And so, yeah, I think that's where we're at now. We're still kind of figuring that out and what is next for us. So what we've kind of settled is kind of a hybrid. My wife has created a pretty amazing work situation for herself where she works part-time, she works remote, and I am totally left my career, but I am writing. I wrote a book. I'm writing at a blog, and kind of figuring out can I make that into a business that will help provide some more income. And in the process, though, we have all this freedom, and so that's where we're at now. And we're kind of getting basically everything we wanted from retirement without the downsides of retirement, and so that's where we're settled.
Today's episode is brought to you by Profit Comes First. It amazes me how many business owners keep making money mistakes. They use checkbook accounting and spend money when it's there without remembering they have to pay tax bills and they have other obligations to meet. When you change the way that you look at your business, profits soar, and you get to live the life of your dreams. You don't need to learn how to read complicated financial statements. The system works the way you do. Once your money is flowing where you need it to, you can focus on which parts of your business provide the most profit and also cut costs that are not providing value to the business or your customer. The proven system has helped thousands of companies go from struggling to increased profitability. Learn more and book an intro call at profitcomesfirst.com. So let's chat a little bit about the book. The book is called Choose FI, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence. And you said it was kind of a passion project for you. Why did you decide to write the book?
Yeah, so finding this FIRE community, like I said, it hasn't been a smooth road. In some ways, it's kind of made me less happy as I've kind of gone through these different phases and I've been figuring things out. But it's really made me question things, and it's really changed the trajectory of my life. I think just because we were such good savers, we were doing fine. We would have probably retired early meaning 55 or 60. But because we found this community and because we've taken on these principles, I was able to leave my job at 41 while my daughter is I left when she was, 4 or 5 years old. And so I had a year with her before she could start kindergarten, where I really felt like the first 4 or 5 years of her life, other people were raising her and I didn't even know my own daughter. And now I spend abundant time with her. And we kind of were always wanting to get away to do our outdoor activities. And it was so hard even before having a child. And then once we had a child, like that kind of went away. And now I'm able to get out and do these things. And it's a healthier lifestyle. And really, again, it's almost like a spiritual thing just to be able to be out in spaces. And I love that aspect of it. And so, it's just really changed. It's a totally different life than I would have had. And it's almost like if you find this, it's almost like this secret that you can't keep it. It's almost like a moral thing you have to tell other people and help spread the message. And so I think that's what motivated me to want to spread this and share it, but to do it in a different way than what I was seeing being done.
So we'll dig into that in a second, but just a quick question, because I know you like to get out and go to the outdoors and all of that. Are you homeschooling your daughter, or is she in traditional school system?
She is in a charter school. So we lived in Western Pennsylvania when we were building our wealth. And then after I left my job, we now live in Ogden, Utah. And there's a big charter school scene here. So that's where we've started her. We definitely are talking about at some point trying homeschooling. But yeah, we're kind of all over. We don't really know where we'll settle with that, but there's a lot of appeal to it. But I also see a lot of challenge to it. So right now she's kind of thriving in the environment she's in. So we don't feel any urgency to change, but that's what we're doing with her now as a charter school, public charter.
And I was just asking because, if you want to go backpacking for a month and you've got school, it creates a conflict. And that's really the underlying issue.
Yeah. And so some of the stuff that we would do, like before kids, like we would do high altitude mountaineering, and you have to be, just to acclimate, you're gone for 2 weeks at a time and traveling to faraway places. And so by living here, we were able to access, I can go out basically every day. It's in my backyard. I can mountain bike, I can ski, I can hike, I can climb. And it's not the same as being out on an adventure for 2 weeks, but I'm able to do it so much more. And it's just very rewarding. And so that's kind of where we settled. I think nothing in life is perfect, but we've been able to find a pretty nice compromise that works for our family.
And that's cool. You have to figure out what works for your family. And that, I think, is the important part there.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you wanted to share it, but different than what you see kind of other people doing. So what concerns do you have with what you're seeing out there now that you wanted to bring a different message?
So you and I recently met at FinCon conference, which is a conference for financial bloggers. And as we both witnessed, the quote unquote FIRE community or FI community, it's just massive, and it's the largest growing segment. And there's all these different people. But when I started writing 5 or 6 years ago, so people can't see me, but I'm a white guy. And I felt like I was adding diversity just because I was from a healthcare profession and I had made a lot of mistakes. And I kind of rejected this narrative that everything was about frugality because that really wasn't my experience. And so I felt like I was adding a different voice. And now there's so many. There's women writing, there's minorities writing, there's people that have done this with very low incomes, there's the entrepreneur path, there's all these different people. And so what I wanted to do was kind of, instead of this being so guru driven, and there's still that misperception that, you have to be 0 or 1 kids and have an engineering or technical finance mind. And I wanted to kind of give a lot of different stories and establish principles out of that really anybody could apply, and kind of make it like a choose your own adventure, that you could pick and choose the levers that you want to pull to make it work with your lifestyle. And instead of you have to follow this one guru's way and do everything one way, you kind of pick what works for you. And there is no right or wrong way to do it, but there's many ways that you can create your own path.
And I think that's important. People need to realize if you're following someone else's path, it might have worked for them, but it might not be right for you. And you've got to figure out your own path. It's not to say, go read 10 gurus and take 10 things that you learn from 10 different people that you find best, and then look at the 10 things you don't like about them and remove those from your life, but then create your own path forward, because then it's one that's going to bring happiness to you. Otherwise, you're living somebody else's path, and you may find you don't like it after a while. And that's probably why a lot of people quit and don't continue down the path continuously, because it's too much work, because it's not in alignment with who they are.
Right. And I think people miss is if you look at like my path. So I got out of graduate school at like 25 and I left my career at 41. And compared to the average person that works till 65, that's, I cut that in half basically, or even better than that. But that's still 15, 16 years of your life. And that's a long time. So if you're doing something that you don't like and you're struggling with it every day, it's just not going to work. So you have to kind of figure things out that's going to work with your life. And you really have to enjoy the journey. And that's something that took me a while to figure that out. And that's something I really try to share with other people so they don't follow in some of the mistakes that I made.
And I think that is a very big part of it. And it's a part that's not talked about. And actually, in talking to some of the people who are at FinCon, those who did it super fast actually regret it because they didn't live life. They didn't enjoy the journey. They were so stuck on just that one goal that everything else kind of got blocked out and they missed out. And so I think that is a very big part of it, is enjoying the journey as you go through.
Yeah. And we talked about the downside of me being ignorant of all these things and all the mistakes that I made. But I think the upside of that is because we weren't so focused on this future and having to retire. There was a little period after my daughter was born and we got really serious about this, that we went through this little period of like feeling that we had to retire before we kind of figured out a different path. But for the first 8 or 10 years of our adult lives, we were traveling and doing things while saving a lot. And so in some ways, I wish I would have found this earlier, but in some ways it may have been a blessing that we didn't because we kind of found our path and we were finding a way to live true with our values while we were saving a lot of money. So I guess we could have been saving a good bit more, but I don't know that we would have done some of the things that we value so much now, and that we can't go back if you would have missed those opportunities.
And I think that's important, that you definitely have to enjoy the journey. You don't want to make so many sacrifices that you miss out. And I think that's a very, very important point that needs to come across. I think, though, people need to figure out what it is that's important to them. You kind of lucked out in that you found the outdoors and you love it. But I think a lot of people don't find that thing. They kind of get stuck in the drift. And if you're too busy working and you have no excess or no extra in your budget to do things, you kind of get really, really stuck.
Yeah, just couldn't agree with that more. It's you have to kind of find ways to break those patterns and do different things. And yeah, I definitely think there was an element of it for us that was just luck. Because like I said, we didn't grow up doing these things and we just kind of fell into them and fell in love with them. And luckily that kind of fit with our frugal nature anyway, that, a lot of these things, again, when you get into high altitude mountaineering and you're going to a different continent and spending 2 weeks, it can get expensive, but hiking and being able to enjoy that and rock climbing in your backyard once you have the gear, it doesn't cost much money at all. So yeah, there was definitely an element of luck for us.
So what were some of your big ahas in writing the book?
That's a good question. I think I went in with a thought of what the book was going to be. I think one of the big ahas is kind of what we've been talking about. It was something I was still figuring out at the time because I had been so focused on retirement. And it was a common theme that a lot of people that were interviewed that we used as the basis for the book kind of had that experience. And it was something I was struggling with at the time as I was writing the book of, so what is next for you and what do you really want to do? So you've accomplished this goal and it's kind of like the dog that's chasing the car and then you catch it and smack your head off it and you realize, what the heck was I running so fast for? So I think that was a big theme and that's something we did emphasize. It's really the basis of our first chapter. I think a lot of financial books, it's all about getting to retirement. And we really try to reframe that and focus on using your growing financial independence to make your life better on the journey and just viewing it from a totally different construct. And then as we taught people how to save more and invest better. At the end, we came back to that. And how do you enjoy the journey? And what are some mistakes people made and how do you avoid them? And then what is your purpose once you get beyond financial independence, where you're not reliant on going to work for a paycheck? So why do you want to go to work, and what is your bigger purpose? And so that's kind of where we went. So that was a big one. I think another one, we talked about travel in the book a good bit, and it kind of started. And so in the FI community, a lot of times they talk about using like credit card reward points to travel for free. And it's just this way of looking at the world differently, which is interesting because people who are traveling in this community tend to be traveling more and spending a lot less. So from that perspective, it was interesting. But so that was started on the outline as being a chapter of the book. And it ended up being about 2 pages of that book, of that chapter rather. But what we kind of discovered is, as we were talking to people about their travels and what they learned, just getting out of your bubble and seeing things differently. Because a lot of times people don't travel at all, or they'll do the same like kind of family trip to the beach or something. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But just by changing up your patterns, seeing something totally different, going to a third world country, or if you're not used to roughing it, even just doing a little camping trip, doesn't have to be grand or expensive, but just doing a camping trip with the family and totally getting out of your comfort zone. And there's lessons to be learned there, and insights to be learned from that. And a lot of times it's hard to see things differently when you're stuck in that pattern, kind of like you got at before. So just by changing that up, I think that's really important.
And that's very true. And I can't stand tours. I know people go out of the country and they go on a tour, and I think you still end up in the bubble, right? You're in this little group of people who are similar to you, and you get shown some sights and you get escorted from place to place, but you're not out truly getting to see the world. And you're on this crazy hectic schedule. We leave at 6, you get on the bus, you go here, you do that. You see what everybody else tells you is important to see, and you miss the rest of the world and everything else that's kind of going on around you. And it's important to get out of that. And as you said, most people do really live in that bubble. And I talk about lenses. People look at the world through a certain lens, but when you get out and you change those lenses and you see how other people live, I think it really helps. And I think one of the biggest things that I've heard from people, especially as they go to third world countries, is that they realize, A, how lucky they are. B, I think for a lot of them is they realize that happiness isn't going to come from material things. And then I think the other thing they realize is that kids are pretty durable. You don't need to have all these perfect protected lifestyle that, in the rest of the world, kids are just kind of out doing stuff without all of this supervision and without all this perfect safety stuff. So maybe you relax a little bit and just, as we come back to, enjoying the journey.
And one story, I did share this in the book, but I can share it here. One of the things we wanted to do was just to go hike Mount Kilimanjaro. So we went to Tanzania. We thought that was going to be amazing, and it was. And while we were there, it's like how many times in our life, probably not anymore, maybe one other time we'd get there. So we were going to do an African safari, and that was amazing. But I think for my wife and I, if you asked her, she would probably give you the same story. Like, what is our ultimate best memory, or most, maybe not best, but most powerful memory? The thing that's really stuck with us is when you hike Kilimanjaro, it's kind of how they sustain their economy. So you have to hire a guide and porters. And so I'm always fascinated. I want to just meet people and talk to people. And so most of the porters don't speak English, but there was one that was developing his English, and we were having a conversation, and they would kind of go ahead and they'd be very private when they were setting up their quarters. And so I went over, kind of just approached him, and I saw him setting up like his tent. And like they advised us to bring these 0-degree down sleeping bags that, you'd be able to sleep into that temperature. And as he was setting up his own tent, after carrying our stuff all day, he was sleeping in like an Aladdin, like the Disney cartoon character, kid's sleeping bag. And it just kind of like that contrast of like, they tell you you need this, but yet the locals are able to, they're out there and they're in these kids sleeping bag that was designed for him to sleep on, and a kid to sleep on a floor in a comfortable house. And that's the only thing he could get his hands on and use. And it just kind of makes you realize, like, when you hear people here who are like, I can't cut cable, that would be sacrifice, or I couldn't, go to a lesser phone plan, that would be sacrifice. And you realize like what people are really living and what you can survive and what you can thrive under. I mean, he seemed like a very happy and pleasant person. And It opened my eyes and made me look at the whole world differently, just that one experience.
And I think we're sold comfort and convenience. Like, you have to have X, and that's what you were essentially told. You can't survive without this perfect $200 sleeping bag. But yet, here are these people used to living life, and it's not needed at all. And I think if we look at every part of our life and say, do we really need that? Do we have to have this? And I think that's a big part of what I'm doing now is just, we've been getting rid of things more and more. And I kind of continue to do that. It's like, we don't need all this stuff. It creates obligations and it creates more work for us.
I think we're finding ourselves in a very similar place. We talked about going to FinCon, but the day before I left, we actually just sold our second car. So we've always been a 2-car family, and now we're living this very different lifestyle. So we just decided, let's just sell one and just see what it's like. And there's no reason we couldn't go back and get another car if we really, really miss it or need it. But we're constantly just kind of cutting things out of our life and seeing, like, do we even miss it, or do we just have it because we've always had it and it's habit? And it's definitely easy to fall into those patterns without consciously thinking about things.
And that's true. We have habits, and we're told, if there's 2 people in the house, you need 2 cars. That's just, what you have to do. People don't learn to share and to time and to figure all of that out. And it's the way we used to live in simpler times, right? Families had 1 car.
So we talked about my dad starting his business, and my parents were very busy when I was young. So in a lot of ways, I spent a lot of time. I was almost raised for periods of time, like weekends a lot, with my grandparents who were products of the Depression. And yeah, definitely just seeing the way they live. And that stuck with me. And I still carry a lot of those values to this day, for sure.
So what is your hope for the book? What do you want people to do differently?
I think on one hand, it's really cool to see. So we talked about a couple of years ago, I went to my first FinCon, and there was maybe 100 financial independence people. And now, it's just like overtaking. That's what everybody there is doing, is they have a blog or a podcast. And it's all about financial independence. And so it's neat to see it grow. And as it's getting attention, when it gets into the mainstream media, they still focus on these extreme stories, and they focus on these elements. Like, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal, and it talked about this woman wanted to retire on $2 million. And what's that look like? And it said, like, the lead in then was like brown bananas. I'm like, how many bananas do you have to eat to save $2 million if you're saving on bananas? And so what I want to really do is to make these principles, which, like you just said, a lot of this stuff is just common sense, living within your means, which is so rare these days. Educating yourself and realizing that you can learn about investing, learning to ask better questions and tax planning and things like that, and things that people think are so complicated. I want to make it accessible and make this not an extreme lifestyle, but I'd love to see financial independence just be the way that this community thinks become normal and mainstream, and not necessarily the extreme where you have to retire really early, but the principles that we've been talking about today of living within your means, educating yourself, asking better questions, living more intentionally. And those are the positive things I see out of this community. And that's what I want to convey to a wider audience that maybe isn't familiar with this, either because they haven't heard of it at all, or they've heard of it through something on the nightly news or the Wall Street Journal that isn't really an accurate representation of what we're doing.
So we've spoken a lot, and I think this is what happens in the FIRE community. Everyone talks about the money, but there's a lot more to life than just the money. What other things do you talk about in the book beyond money?
Well, we talk about finding your purpose and your meaning and kind of what is your, I guess, higher calling, you could say, after or even on the path to financial independence, once you've created some space in your life to live more intentionally. And it doesn't certainly have to be everybody preaching this message, but I talked about how this has really changed my life to learn to think differently. And so this is a big piece of it for me, is to educate other people with regards to personal finance and how to use money, not as the be all end all, but as a tool to live a better and more purposeful and more meaningful life. And one of the things, so the book has been done and sitting for a couple months, and it's been intentionally, we waited to put it out because the Choose FI guys, we wanted to kind of use the momentum of the book to build on. They just announced they created a foundation to create more financial literacy in schools and the military and communities that just typically would not listen to a podcast or read our book. We want to do outreach to them. And so we kind of purposely timed the release of these the book and the foundation to kind of build attention for one another. And I think for us, the three of us, myself, Brad, and Jonathan, who do the podcast, that is a big piece of it. But really, it's whatever you find value in and whatever wherever you think you can make a difference. And once you don't have to work for money and you can put your efforts to wherever you want, then that can really look like anything.
And I enjoyed being at the kickoff party for the charity. That was a fun event at FinCon. And it's awesome to see people kind of giving back with a very different financial message than I think what a lot of those people hear. How do people figure out their purpose? Because this is one that I think a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something that I struggle with. So, like I said, this book was definitely a passion project. So it's taken a lot of time over the last 2 years. And honestly, I don't know what is my next big project. I don't know what my ultimate purpose. I do know that one of the things that drove me was just to be a better dad. And that's something I'm really passionate about, and kind of spreading that message. I think sometimes when I share my story and people will say, well, you're just a stay-at-home dad and moms have been doing that forever, but dads haven't been. And I think for dads, your role has always been, you're just the breadwinner. And I think I'd love to kind of start that conversation and grow it and see where we can take it. Because I want to see dads be more a part of kids' lives. And I think that's really important. One of the things I've struggled with is just things like diet and knowing where to find good information. That's something I'm kind of passionate to learn about and maybe see what I can do there. If I would write another book, it would not be another finance book. I think I've kind of, I'm sure there's more things I can learn about money, but I kind of think I found enough and a place where I'm content. But there's a lot of things that I struggle with. That's one, diet and knowing where to find good information. I've always struggled with the idea of faith and religion. And I honestly don't know where I'm at now. And that's something I could see me exploring. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, I think sometimes people think I wouldn't know what I would do if I retired. And I think we talked about like that hamster wheel idea. But you get so trapped that you don't even know where to go. I think I have the opposite problem where I have too many things that I want to explore and I don't even know where to start sometimes.
And I'm with you on that. I have a lot that I want to explore, and I've been having internal conversations with myself about it's time to focus. And I need to start picking themes and focusing them. We've talked about the 12-week year in the past, and I think that is the one that makes the most sense for me at this point in my life. And I'm hoping to kick that off this January and pick a theme that I want to work on for 12 weeks and kind of turn everything else off and make that the number one type of thing that I'm going to focus on. So I'm pretty decent with investing, but I know I need to go to the next level. And I know that's the one that will give me the biggest return on my time. So I'm going to be focusing on options trading and some advanced strategies. And I'm just going to take 12 weeks and just look at that. And then I'll have another theme for 12 weeks and I'll just dig in and go and just focus in that area. So, maybe for you, it's you have 3 of them here, which was diet, kids, and religion. Maybe you take 12 weeks and just focus on nothing but diet and figure out at the end of 12 weeks what an answer is and then implement. I know that's something that I'm trying to, because I try and learn everything. And the problem with doing everything is you sometimes get nothing done.
So when I first decided I was leaving my career, so I did 2 projects simultaneously. So I had been writing this little blog on my own for about four, almost 5 years. And I hadn't really done anything to grow the audience. So I had these thoughts in my head. I wanted to get out there and I wanted to have a bigger audience to reach people. And so in addition to partnering up with Brad and Jonathan, who do the podcast, to do this book, I partnered up with Darrow Kirkpatrick, who wrote the blog, or still writes the blog, Can I Retire Yet? And it's a blog I had read, and I just asked if he would be looking for a partner. So I kind of had 2 projects before I ever actually left my job. And he talked to me about, like, am I sure I want to do that? And I was so passionate about it, I was sure. But I definitely feel like it's hard to really know what you want when you're stuck in that hamster wheel and you're stuck in having just all of your time dominated. And so, yeah, I definitely think I need to step back. And I like that idea of a 12-week year. And honestly, I don't even know where I would start. It's definitely an interesting concept, and it has my wheels spinning already.
You just pick one topic, the one you want to start with, and you literally spend the first of the. So it's a 12-week year. The year is actually broken down into 13-week quarters. And you spend the first week doing nothing but lining up your schedule for the next 12. So all the books you might want to read, all the things you want to accomplish, you just drop them all out into the calendar and then you go do it. But the first thing you have to do is pick the theme, which isn't easy. What's my theme that I want to work on first that will give me the big result?
It's a very interesting concept.
So is there anything else on the subject of living a richer, more meaningful life that you wanted to share but didn't get a chance to?
No, I mean, I think we covered things really well. I enjoyed the conversation.
So I always ask, based on our conversation, what's one action step people can take this week to move forward?
I think what I like to do is I'm really big on doing an 80-20 analysis. So once I figure out what area I want to go in, before you just start willy-nilly, throwing everything at the wall, kind of figure out what are those 20% of actions that you could take that's going to give you 80% of the results. And then out of those, maybe even do that again. And what are like the one or two things that you really could do? So I think the specific advice is dependent on what you're trying to accomplish. But I think that's a really good approach, is to kind of narrow down on what's going to give you the biggest impact for the amount of effort that you're going to put in.
And we've talked about 80-20 all the time. I actually take it to the next step, which is 2 20s. So 40% gets you to 96. And then you have 60% left and lets you do a lot more. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
I'm trying to get away from the financial theme because we've talked a lot about that. For me, I think when I feel just at peace is to get away from everything, turn off the social media, get away from the TV. And for me, I love to be out in nature. And I think that makes me, in some ways, it's almost seems a little counterintuitive or backward to the question that you asked, but it makes me feel small in the world. But it also makes me realize how abundant the world is, just how big it is. And that's what really kind of lights me up, is to be out in nature and particularly be out in big places.
And I've heard that from many people. When they talk about meditation or kind of finding peace, a lot of people talk about just getting out into nature and getting grounded. So I think it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And I think like meditation's like the buzzword, and I've never been able to master it. Like I really have a hard time turning my brain off, and I'm always thinking and racing. And when I just get out, that's like my one place that I do just feel at peace and have true happiness. So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing for me.
And I think part of meditation is not turning your brain off. It's just observing what your brain is doing instead of interacting with it.
I have a hard time to stop the interaction, I guess.
Takes practice, just like everything else. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
I think the kind of little, if I can put into a little catchphrase that I tell people now, is just, you have to learn the rules. I wish I would have asked more questions. I think I got really good going through school at taking tests and learning in that way. But I just didn't ask enough questions. And I think the reason that I have the position in life that I have, the successes that I've had, is because I have not followed just what everybody else is doing. And I've stepped back and kind of chosen my own path. And the biggest mistakes I've made, to the contrary, is because I just felt like we talked about investing and retirement, and I just didn't question things. I just kind of went with that conventional wisdom. And I wish I would have asked more and better questions. So yeah, I'd go with that.
And I think that's great advice. I think everything that we're told puts you on the path that everybody else is on, would put you in the drift in the life that isn't the life you choose to live. And actually asking better questions of yourself as well helps to change that.
For sure.
What one piece of advice would you give to your younger self?
I mean, it almost kind of plays into that, but I really wish I would have said to ask more questions. You asked me before about like what we were doing with our child. And that's probably the biggest reason. And there's definitely some selfish reasons, like with being able to travel and that I've thought about homeschooling. I just think that I kind of lost my love of learning there for a while, just because I just got so tuned into, this is what I have to do to pass a test. This is what I have to do to get a license. This is what I have to do to get a job. And I just kind of felt like I lost that love of learning for, I don't know, probably a decade, from like when I was finishing grad school and I just wanted to be done, and going through the motions in life till I found this whole fire community. And I talked about how like it kind of transcends just money, but it's really made me question everything. Like, why do I believe what I believe with fitness, with health, with faith, with all these different things? I found this to be really kind of transcendent beyond just money. So I wish I would have, I would say, don't lose that love of learning and protect it. And that's something I definitely watch closely with my own child. And I think if, like I said, she's kind of thriving in a traditional school right now, but she's only 7, and I'm sure there will come a time when that changes. And that's something I want to try to really keep my finger on.
And that constant learning is very important. And I think I went through some of the same struggles of school forces you to learn a certain way, but that's not really learning. So when you can learn for the sake of learning, for whatever your curiosity is, go do it. If people would like to find you and connect and learn more about you, what's the best way for them to do that?
It's kind of funny after I said about how I've kind of turned 180 and I'm not like really that interested in retirement, the concept, but my home on the internet is at the blog, caniretireyet.com. And I kind of found myself there because that was the question that I started with, and it's kind of led me down this path. So that's where I'm at, and I'm very responsive there with emails and comments, so people can reach out and find me there. And then we also talked a bit about the book that I've been working on. It's Choose FI, Your Blueprint to Financial Independence. And you can find that at choosefi.com/book.
Cool. And we will put those links in the show notes to make it easy for everyone to find them. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoy talking to you whenever I get the opportunity.
I really enjoyed the conversation with Chris. There are a lot of nuggets in this episode. One is to figure out your path. Don't copy someone else's path. 2, cut your spending. By only spending on what you love, you don't want to live in a way that you don't enjoy. 3, realize the possibility of working on what you love, not on what you have to do. It's a lot more fun when you enjoy the work that you do. You get up excited for the day. Life is pretty simple, but doing that simple is sometimes hard. This week's action step: perform an 80-20 analysis on your life. What are the 20% of things that bring you 80% of the results? This will allow you the time freedom to be able to do the thinking of the bigger picture of you. So we're back to where we started today with that quote. And my ask, what will you do? If you're still listening, you must have liked this episode, so please share it with a few friends. It can start a great conversation, and I'd appreciate that. You can also connect with me on Facebook, on either the Facebook page or the Facebook group for Richer Soul. What's preventing you from moving forward, and who are you putting on your team to help build the life you deserve? Taking no action creates a far worse outcome in life than trying something and failing. Can I help you achieve your goals through coaching and accountability? Just email me and we can start with a short chat to see if we're a good fit for coaching. For many people, one session allows them to take a giant leap forward towards their dreams. You can always get me at rocky@richersoul.com. I'd love to hear how you're doing and how the information I've shared has helped you. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.